Hello everyone. How is it going? Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. I was like, is today Thursday or Tuesday? Thank you for joining us on this
On a
Tuesday,
tea day.
right?
On
For
a day
this,
that ends in Y.
Yeah.
that's yeah, I don't even know what it is. It's December, right? Thank you for joining us, audience, in this very special day for this exciting fireside chat with Pete and Jason. I have two stars here with me today, so I'm a little bit nervous. So I am going to do a quick
You should be.
icebreaker. Yeah,
You
right.
should
I
be
have two
intimidated.
big names over
You
here.
should be. You should really be intimidated. Yeah,
I know.
awestruck.
So I'm gonna ask the audience to join me here and to go to the chat and tell us where you're calling from. Audience, we would love to hear from you. And while you do that, audience, I'm gonna ask my speakers quick icebreaker. So tell me, Pete and Jason, what is your favorite holiday tradition? And let me start with Pete.
I think probably so. I live in San Francisco. I have a 5-year-old son, and I think that at this point, I think all the sales nerds out here will appreciate this. So I manage our holiday like recurring events in Airtable, obviously, because like where else would you do that? And we have a kind of a circuit, if you will. One of the big ones is, of course, like ice skating Union Square, and then of course you got to go to the massive gingerbread houses and in the Fairmont on Nob Hill. There's a whole thing. I should probably just like open source the Airtable, but like that's those are the favorite ones there. What about you, Jason?
I think my favorite holiday tradition I think is not necessarily appreciated, which is interesting, but my favorite holiday tradition is profit sharing.
Same
So
here.
Perfect. Cool.
well, like I continue to learn, right? And SaaStr is a community, right? And we have a venture fund and we have other things, but even though like 99% of our content's free, everything's out there, we do have revenue. We have sponsors and a small amount of ticket revenue and a few million in revenue from our podcast and newsletters. And so for our little team of 10, we do profit sharing because after 8 years, it's actually profitable. And I learn a lot of things about what a bootstrapper's journey is like from that. And so we do profit sharing. I like it. And when you have a good year, the profit sharing is material. Although it's interesting that I don't know if people appreciate it. And I don't know that I think it's a pretty terrible retention tool, but I do enjoy it nevertheless. I like the idea of it. I think it's a good thing because people actually don't know what their profit sharing is. And when it ends up more than they expected, it's like a holiday surprise. So that's my favorite, but I may be
So
alone here.
so this is kind of like the opposite of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, where like people get or where Clark Griswold gets the subscription to the Jam of the Month Club or Jelly of the Month
Yeah,
Club.
well, it happened at
That's it.
Accenture this year. They said they're not giving holiday. They rescinded their holiday bonuses at Accenture. I mean, Accenture's huge, so it's
Did
not
they
just
do at
National
least?
Lampoon. What's
Did they
that?
do the jam? Did they at least do the jams though?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm more of a Vegas vacation fan than Christmas, so I don't know that one quite as well.
What about you, Eduardo?
I love setting up the Christmas tree, but I would say my favorite is eating and drinking wine. So that's my answer.
All right,
Uh,
wonderful.
Thank you for this icebreaker, speakers. Let's get things started in here. I see the audience telling us they're all over the country, which is pretty exciting. But we're here today to hear from Jason and Pete. So I will be pretty quick on my introduction. And this event today is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our modern sales pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they would struggle to solve on their own and to help them see around corners they might not know about. And we do that through live sessions like this great one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum and we have quarterly summits, which is very exciting. And next year, we are getting back to in-person events. Who would have thought? And if you're not already part of the MSP crew, you will be invited to join right after this event. And if you love this content today, we are back with the next virtual Modern Sales Pros Revenue Excellence Summit. Joining us for the Mega SKO January 24th to 26th. 2023. We have more than 20 events, more than 5,000 modern sales pros in attendance, 60 plus high caliber speakers. You can hear from leaders at Drift, Sales Loft, Lean Data, Stage 2 Capital, plus so much more. Don't miss out next year.
Those
I
are good
am
ones.
going. Yeah, right. It's like
Yeah.
a panel
Little party.
filled with stars. So I just dropped a link in the chat for you, audience, to go ahead and sign up for the summit. But that's enough about other events. Let's focus on how to get the most out of this one. So first, this event is being recorded. You will be able to access the recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. And second, I was talking with Jason and Pete in the backstage, and they said they really like answering questions. And it's not
Love them.
always that you have 2 stars on your hands just to answer your questions. So please go in the chat, answer all your questions. I mean, ask all your questions to Pete and Jason, or use the Q&A panel on your right-hand side, right there, and they will get to your questions during the panel. And the best thing now about MSP, we don't work alone. We have partners. And today, this event is brought to you by Atrium. I have Pete in here representing Atrium. So Pete, since you are our moderator for today, I'm going to pass the mic to you. You can introduce us to Atrium, introduce yourself, and kick things off. I'll go back on stage and hear this live. I'm going to take a lot of notes, and I'll be back at the end for some outro notes. Does that sound good?
Sounds awesome. Thanks, Eduardo. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. I'll see you later.
Cool. So hey everyone, my name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium and also our CRO here. And so for folks who are not familiar, Atrium makes what we call data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales managers, AE, SDR managers use data to improve team performance. And so what Atrium does is it continuously monitors dozens of AE and SDR KPIs and proactively alerts managers and leaders when something is off with your reps, your teams, and so on. And so what this means is that managers can get to coaching insights way faster and drive positive behavior change and win. And one of the really cool things about Atrium is it takes about 5 minutes to set up a free preview account with a read-only connection to your Salesforce CRM. So that's a little bit about us.
What
I
kind
would
of
love to get.
signals are you most tracking these days? What from Atrium? What do you track? What are the big signals?
Yeah, I mean, the way to kind of think about it, Jason, I know you're another sales nerd like me. I need to get you one of our hats. Sales success is really just a question of engaging in a high quantity of high quality selling behavior, whether it's like SDRs or AEs or what have you. And so it just turns out that there's dozens of KPIs that kind of wrap around that rep in order to kind of indicate, like, are they engaging in sufficient quantity or quality? And so probably the things that we're seeing nowadays across teams would be, because of the kind of economic turbulence, would be kind of like declining win rates a little bit. And so of course, like, we don't just sit there and admire a problem, right? Like, we have to change our behavior in order to contend with that. And so what that means is, SDR teams are being compressed. So that means that AEs are being asked to prospect more. Of course, you would then want to measure that. Inbound is drying up. And so as a result, all opportunities need a full swing and a full attack, if you will. And so seeing kind of pipeline hygiene metrics really getting scrutinized, like untouched opportunities, stuck opportunities, not really acceptable. Like maybe they used to be. Were they ever really acceptable? I don't know. But maybe people kind of stuck their fingers in the ears and went la la la. So that's that. So actually,
and what do
yeah,
you see? What are you seeing from all these signals? Because this is a passion topic of mine. What are you seeing in terms of at your customers or clients that are impacted, right? And I don't think everyone's impacted, which we could talk about today, but those that are seeing a downturn. What are you seeing in the top performers, not the average or medium performers? What are you seeing in the top performers?
Yeah, well, so first and foremost, I mean, Atrium has nearly 300 customers at this point, and
well,
we
that's
definitely
statistically
have.
significant, right? 300
Yeah,
statistically significant.
it's not nothing, right? And actually we can query across all, kind of like aggregated anonymous data. There are declines in win rates across the board. It's small companies, medium companies, large companies.
Yep.
So it's kind of one of those things where
but within the sales, this is what I think is so interesting in tougher times. What are you seeing within sales teams? Because what I've seen again and again and again, I'm seeing this all across my portfolio, right? Is that when you get into tougher times, the impacts are not the same across your sales team. In fact, your top performers, and even I saw this as a SaaS CEO in 08 and 09, which was 1,000 frigging times worse than today. Okay, kids, it was 1,000 times worse when the entire financial system melted down and you weren't even sure your customers could pay you cash. You don't even know what it was like back then. but the top performers closed the same for us. Now we had churn and other issues. Mid-pack declined and the bottom reps just stopped selling, right? And I'm seeing this across multiple portfolio other companies where the top folks, like they're doing the same, even better sometimes for other reasons. And then boom, the distribution across the bell curve has radically changed from good times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like usually the top performers were like always engaging in the right behaviors to begin with. Like they were on top of their
right?
pipeline, their high activity, and so it just turns out that like I don't know, it's like the Warren Buffett quote, but like rising tide, and then like when the tide goes out, you kind of see who's like swimming naked, and I think that kind of applies at a company level, and then also applies at a rep level as well. But Jason, before we get too far afield here, I would love for you to maybe introduce yourself really briefly.
Okay,
kind of like
I was just trying to take Atrium in an interesting way for anyone that'll watch this, because you have this data. You have 300 pieces of data. It's good. People like data these days, right?
Well, I think the big thing is that it's all about reacting. And so what you need to do is react to the reality in the world. And so what that means is like organizations who used to be maybe like laissez-faire when it came to pipe management, like they're starting to realize that they can't be that, or laissez-faire with respect to activity levels. You can't do that anymore. But Jason, maybe you kind of share a little bit about like what you spend your time doing right now. We're going to get a little bit into your background and how kind of SaaStr came about and what have you, but maybe just, kind of like the 20 seconds on what you spend your time doing right now.
Sure. Well, I run SaaStr, which is, the world's largest self-organized community for SaaS founders and execs. I was a 2 times founder. I accidentally sold my last company, EchoSign, now Adobe Sign, to Adobe now over 10 years ago, just when we hit $1 million a month in revenue, growing 100%. With 120%
we were a customer.
NRR. Oh, there you go.
We were a customer at my last software company, EchoSign customer. Love that Salesforce integration. Just
we pioneered a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Fired it off right from the contact object. It was great.
Anyhow, that was a long time ago. Since then, I've both been investing. I've invested maybe $150 million through SaaStr funds and otherwise, and some good unicorns and pre-unicorns. Try to do 3 or 4 investments a year, and just kind of built SaaStr itself up, both as mainly as a community, but also as now a business for the first time in the last 2 years, just trying to help founders get to the next level. And we now have like 6,000 pieces of content, 700 podcasts. We crossed 1,000 YouTubes. So hopefully we've got almost every great SaaS or cloud CEO sharing. It's all the same. Every SaaStr post for 10 years, we've been doing this for 10 years. It's the same. It's the stuff I screwed up on the way to being successful. That's the cheat to good content in this space.
Totally, right?
Not saying how great I am, not saying how I pushed through a downturn. Share your mistakes. Go to Eric Wan, go to Stuart Butterfield, go to whoever you want, and just ask them, what were your 5 worst mistakes? And it's just a gem. That's what we want to hear. Is not what you got right, because that's useless to us as founders and executives, right? How I really crush sales. No, like, what were the biggest 5 sales mistakes you made getting to 20 million or 50 million or under? That's when you have these aha moments. You're like, so that's what SaaStr is. It's a collection of a decade of mistakes from the people better than me.
I don't think that quite like trips off the tongue the same as the current kind of like tagline, a bag of mistakes, but like, it's definitely spicy.
It's a trip.
Yeah. And so for folks who are not familiar with me, my name is Pete Kazanji. I am one of the founders of Atrium. But before Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin. It was a recruiting software company that was acquired in 2014 by Monster Worldwide. And that's really where I kind of got familiar with what I call modern sales. So I went from being a business generalist founder at TalentBin to being our first seller, our first sales manager, our sales leader. And then I was responsible for new product sales at Monster. Subsequent to that, I ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, primarily kind of focused on founders and first-time sellers and what have you. And then, of course, started Modern Sales Pros. For folks who are interested, who are attending today, we're giving away a set of a book by John McMahon, the Qualified Sales Leader, Coffees for Closers Yeti, and a copy of Corey Bray's 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach. So we're going to go ahead and drop that link here if you'd like to sign up for a copy of those. So Jason, I think like what I would love to do is maybe just like back it up just like a hot second. I think people are probably pretty familiar with like SaaStr, unless you've been like living under a rock. But I think what's interesting is like I would love to understand how you got into tech. Maybe in the time before EchoSign, because if I recall correctly, you're a recovering lawyer, from a long time ago
We're
in
going
a
back in
galaxy,
time. Yes.
yeah, galaxy far, far away. How did you get into tech before starting EchoSign?
Well, look, I don't know if it's so interesting. There. Listen, but now we're kind of now that we're in a so-called downturn, and I don't think we're in a downturn whatsoever. But now that our people are comparing it, they're comparing it to 2008, 2009. They're even comparing it to the Web 1.0 bomb days of 2001 to 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And in any event, I was a terrible corporate attorney for about 22 months. The only redeeming feature I had, which is good for, was two. One, I got to just watch tons of startups in the early days become successful, from Yahoo and a whole bunch of others. And I learned the value of being tenacious and hard work, and what these startups look like. Like, what's interesting, and I'll answer your question. The world really changed. I can't figure out exactly when, sometime around 2017, 2018. And I think Y Combinator was a big part of it, which was you used to be insane to go to a startup to work at a startup, right? I mean, there was pirate flags at Apple's headquarters in Cupertino when Steve Jobs ran it. When I went into startups, you were insane. And to start one, you really had to be insane because there was 100% chance you would fail.
Pathological.
Yeah, now it's become productized. Even in these slightly tougher times, everyone wants to start a startup. It's seen as risk-free for a variety of reasons. But anyhow, there was a period of time when startups were dead, and a bunch of folks of my era that were smart, which would never do it today, actually went to law school. I did it. David Sachs did it. Keith Raboy did it. Peter Thiel. I know there's a lot of PayPal ones, but there's a reason. There's a whole bunch of other ones. David Hornick, who's at August and Lobby Capital. A lot of us sort of went in did this because there weren't a lot of tech jobs for a while. You think it's bad, trust me, there were times when there were 0 tech jobs. And then as we kind of came out, we realized, hey, we learned something, but we immediately wanted to get back into entrepreneurism. So anyhow, I practiced law, again, Adventure Law Group, a startup only law firm, which was a crazy idea back then.
You were at VLG?
A long time ago, yeah. And then I left after a little bit less than 22 months with no money to my name, and just sort of started my startup journey. But it was still helpful. Like, things have changed, but like to this day, at the start of my career, having sat in board meetings for 20 venture-backed startups, I take this stuff for granted today, and sometimes I don't explain myself well to founders because they don't have this breadth of experience. I started off as a kid in tech, having already watched 10 great CEOs, 5 middling and 5 terrible, run the playbook, hire executives, screw it up, work with VCs, and I didn't do it as an observer, but if you're really curious, being a true fly on the wall is amazing. And that's why things like SaaStr and podcasts like this are so great, because we didn't used to have these insights. Everything used to be opaque, and now it's so transparent. It's such a gift for founders. But that's how I started. We could go into more, and then from there I joined a startup, started to myself, and then sort of started this SaaStr journey just as a blog back in 2012. But it's interesting. We could talk about if you really want my history, but it was really interesting that SaaStr just immediately took off, right? I remember the first blog post I wrote. It was "Everybody Lies," and it was a blog post about everyone before anyone had IPO'd, how much people lie about their revenue, right? They don't lie as much today, but they still lie. And Aaron Levy loved it, and Dharmesh Shah. This first post, I had no SEO, I had no social media, but when Dharmesh and Aaron all promoted it, I'm like, okay, let's see where it goes, and then it kind of took off.
This might be something. Yeah, I agree with you about the productization, and I think it's kind of like, if you think about open source software, right, and like the modern startup stack and how it kind of like stacks on top of a bunch of open source. You have a similar thing going on with like expertise as well, right? So like you have a bunch of great publications. So Steve Blank's 4 Steps to Epiphany, which is now the Startup's Owner's Manual, Eric Ries's Lean Startup, your book with Aaron Ross, from Impossible to Inevitable, and like things like Founding Sales. I kind of I like to say that Founding Sales is like the sequel to the Lean Startup, but all these things were kind of like opaque 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what have you. And then of course you have the actual kind of like that's like the DIY version, and then you have the actual like personal trainer version, which is like Y Combinator, where it's like, all right, cool, like get on the ground, like do these push-ups,
group training. I wouldn't call it
Yeah.
personal training, but group training. Yeah.
Oh, group training. Sure. Yeah. No.
It's like
Fair
classes.
point.
It's like
Right.
classes.
Right. It's like berries, right? Like
Yeah, it's like
berries.
Barry's is successful, as is
Yeah.
YC. Yeah, YC
Well,
might
I
be the
mean,
berries of startup creation.
yeah, maybe Barry should take maybe they should take an equity rip from from their clients. I don't know if that would work out, but it's okay. So like maybe you can share a little bit because I think you said you started a couple of companies, but then
Yep.
obviously like EchoSign kind of like took off.
Yes.
What inspired like the starting of EchoSign? I mean, obviously as an attorney, you had to like facilitate like lots of signing of shit. So
Yeah.
well, like what was the spark there? And maybe we can talk a little bit about the EchoSign journey.
Um. Well, they're all, it's interesting. My journeys as a startup, as a founder, like 2.5 times, they're so different. So the first company I founded was in the depths of another, like, no startups exist, right? In 2004. It was terrible. That was also just a friggin' terrible time, which we could chat about. And I worked at a startup. Then I was a VP of business development, who in 1 year went from 30 million in revenue to zero, and had
Fun.
all their venture term sheets pulled. So I had no revenue and no funding. And I looked around the office of 200 employees with no revenue and no funding, and I said, I got to make something out of this situation. And I grabbed this quiet engineer who was a few cubes away from me, and she and I started a crazy company in hard tech that made implantable batteries from nanomaterials. And it was a science project she'd done for $50,000. And then 14 months later, we sold that for 50 million. So that was my first journey as a founder, from 50K to 50 million. And in that case, really, it was her idea, right? That I had the inspiration to productize, because I had clearly was going to have no job soon. So but some interesting stories around that. So that's where it came from, was building the company. My idea, sure, but it was her technology that she had built. We sold that company for 50 million. I made a little bit of money. I was done. I was happy. I was running every day. I was fit. I felt like I was barely good enough to be an entrepreneur. I was sort of done. And then I had a coworker who just nudged me and said, we got to do another startup. We got to do a startup together. I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm pretty set. Like, I've already achieved all I thought I could ever achieve in this world. But we thought about, in the early days, and now it's what do we call it? The future of work, or what do we call all this stuff?
Sure.
But back then we're like, okay, back in 2005, we're like, this is a long freaking time ago. What processes should be webified that aren't being today? And actually, we're still doing this today. It's much more in vertical SaaS and niches, but there's so many industries that have not been SaaSified, right?
Right.
But in the early days, you had to pick things where not everyone was online 24/7, and we're like, well, the fax machine's broken.
Like async. Right.
Yeah, and so we had known, and comps are interesting because, and so we decided at the time to build in the browser something you didn't think you could do in the browser, which was automate all this document processing around signing. Obviously, it's obvious today, but back at the time, DocuSign existed, but it was only a Windows printer driver. It wasn't fully web enabled. And as crazy as it sounds, we were the first people to make it work in the browser, and the product was really terrible when we launched it. But it was beautiful, and it worked. And the biggest mistake, I made a bunch of mistakes, but the biggest mistake was back then in the early days of SaaS, I committed to doing 2 million our first year. 2 million. I was sure of it. I had two great co-founders. And the bar was lower back then, right? There weren't a million great startups. Like TechCrunch literally just would list all the startups back then.
All of them.
They were all on a page. That's what Crunchbase came out of, was this page where Michael Arrington would just list all of them. So I knew what the universe was like. I knew we weren't the smartest of all, but I'm like, we're pretty good.
Not that
like
many.
Yeah,
like
we could do 2 million. We could do 2 million our first year. And I was confusing B2C with B2B metrics was one big reason. Because I wasn't new to sales, but I was new to SaaS. And I got the freemium conversion metrics wrong. And we ended the year, we launched with the terrible version. It took us 6 months to have a decent version of the product. And we still ended the year with a couple $100,000 in revenue, which I think now we tell founders, keep going. Like, if you can end from launch to a couple 100,000 to 20 or 30K MRR, like, that's pretty good. And in 2006, it was epic. But the team was dejected. One of my co-founders walked out the door and basically quit. Another was really frustrated. The team was down, and I'd really set a crazy bar and a bunch of lessons learned in that. We hit, it took us 2 more years to hit 2 million, but then it just kept going. So I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but that's the history. Yeah. And then I think, we keep relearning these lessons, and I wish the biggest lesson of all, and this is really why SaaStr is started, is we sold in 2011. And again, this is coming out of the global meltdown of 2009, 2010. No one watching this that thinks things are bad today has any idea how bad 2009, 2010. I will tell you just one story, but then I remember like in late 2008, my banker from Citibank called me. I had $3 million in venture capital in the bank. He's like, Jason, you got to take all your money out tonight. What do you mean? He's like, Citibank's going to fail tomorrow, and you will not be able to get your cash. Yeah, I'm like, what am I going to do at 3 p.m.? Who do I call? Where do I put it?
Just go down to the Citibank in downtown Palo Alto. They've got $3 million in doubloons sitting right there, right?
Yeah, it was that bad. But then so we come out of times start to recover in 2011, and again we're at 10 million ARR. We've only burned 4 million. We're profitable, or we're cash flow positive. We're growing 120% with a pretty viral product. We're going 100% with 120% NRR. We didn't all really know what NRR meant back then. It took a few years. But what I needed in 2011 was someone to say, hey, Jason, with $4 million, you've built a $10 million profitable recurring revenue business growing 100% a year, essentially organically, with a great team, but organically, with 120% ARR. Whatever you do, you idiot, don't sell.
Keep going.
Whatever you do, right? And Aaron Levy had a similar conundrum a few years later when Citrix offered to buy Box for $600 million. And it was a different time and place. But that's what SaaStr was just helping folks understand how to do better, how to triangulate how you're doing. And we know this stuff today, right? No one in their right mind with a profitable business with those metrics would sell today. But here's the thing, like, people think things are bad now. SaaS was really, really, really hard until about 2018. It was so hard. It was so hard to find any customers. The markets were so much smaller. Budgets were so much smaller, right? It was so hard. At EchoSign, we would celebrate a $300 a month customer, $3,600 a year, right? You can't even buy a Chrome plugin in some cases for that much money. Like it's not that there's been inflation. It's just that the budgets were tiny, right? Cloud budgets are 20x bigger in 10 years. And even if we see what we're seeing today isn't a downturn, we're seeing deceleration.
Yeah.
We're seeing deceleration from insane buying patterns in many categories from late 2020 to early 2022. And there should be deceleration, right? There are not, the buyers have not disappeared. They're buying more SaaS and cloud products than ever. They're just not buying at the utterly insane rates in many categories that we bought last year in aggregate, right? So anyhow, that's the story. And I think you do have to know as a founder when to hold them, when to fold them, when to push on. But the meta story is, and this is like an early SaaStr post, get better mentors. You need one, whether you're a VP or a CEO, you need one, ideally two, but one great mentor, and ideally a great peer group, right? Not good. Good isn't good enough, because if you're the best one in your peer group, you don't learn anything, right? This is the tough part of mentorships and peer groups. They have to be better than you, right? But don't seek them out like a heat-seeking missile, and don't let them go, and keep finding them and finding them. They will save you.
Right. That's funny about the wow. I didn't realize that you guys got to cash flow positivity so quickly there. I mean, I think on the one hand, it's kind of
easy, but yes, you can. I learned you can do it. But the interesting question is, how do you do it?
Yeah, like I mean, there's a couple of different things there, right? Like obviously the set, like way fewer people kind of like biting at the apple of SaaS budgets back in the day.
No.
Well, but like obviously, but like there was way smaller budgets, right? As you
what it is you need, if you want to listen, there are companies that are wildly profitable and capital efficient, and there are companies that are horribly inefficient, right? There's really two factors that drive it, right? First of all is up to a point competition, right? The more competition you have, if capital is available, it's going to consume more capital, right? Because you're gonna compete for the same resources, right? So we had a lot of competitors in the day, but there were really only two, right? Back in the day, it was us and DocuSign, and we spent zero, and they spent a lot. And that was to our both benefit and detriment. It was to our detriment in that they could deploy capital in places we didn't. It was to our benefit that if you popped us into a Google search, we got into all the deals they generated. We at least got the second bite at the apple, right? So we were able to draft beyond a competitor spending a lot for a while. So that is important, the type of competition, but also, and the related thing is now, we're all into this product-led growth crap today. The real question is your product partially viral, or in one way or another, does it generate a material number of leads, right? And our product, directly or indirectly, would generate about 40% of our new customers, 20% directly through viral, and 20% through tracked word of mouth, which any app should have. Anyone should have word of mouth if you're good, right? And so by doing that, we were able to, basically, we spent nothing on marketing. Like, it has to come from somewhere. Like, you have to spend nothing on product, nothing on sales, or nothing on marketing. That's the only way to be profitable in B2B,
capital efficient, right?
No, no, but the truth is, actually, it's not just capital efficient. You can't spend nothing. So you can spend a lot on product, but you got to pick from the three categories. Let's call it product, sales, and marketing. You can't really skimp on support or servers, right? A little bit. But if you cut one of them back, right, like an Atlassian or like we did or others or Calendly did for a while, you can be radically efficient, right? Because then you're not spending 100% of each dollar. Each of them, you could look at different ratios from Republic, but roughly product, sales, and marketing are each going to consume 33% of each dollar. So if you say, hey, we're going to go all viral on marketing, right? Or we're going to have a hyper PLG model in sales, like with only a partial touch, right?
Yeah,
or
Calendly.
we're gonna have one engineer working there. That one's the toughest one in SaaS. That's how you get profitable. That's how you get profitable, right? There's rare ones, right?
You have to. I was gonna say you'd have to have like a pretty good like product insight that like where it can be like low cost to create some sort of like recurring money machine with very low. And I guess actually if you think about all three of those things, maybe Calendly is a great example of that. Not to trivialize like the impact of the app, but probably not the deepest technology to build in the world from a scheduling standpoint, because it was primarily like consumer / like prosumer, inherently viral, and also a low touch sales model there. And you kind of contrast that to like Chili Piper, which is obviously heavier product. And we use the heck out of Chili Piper here at my organization, but like heavier product, more complicated, higher ASPs, of course. But
maybe not
also
today.
just like not like higher ASPs at the beginning, but like obviously like less explosive growth as you kind of delineate. Cool. So kind of like moving on on EchoSign, maybe you can share a little bit about like what inspired SaaStr. Were you doing it at the same time as EchoSign, or like did EchoSign get acquired by?
Well, it's funny.
Adobe,
there was,
and then it was like a second, like you take a breath, or what was the deal?
In like late 2000 2010, like people were still emotionally struggling with that downturn, right? Like there was scar tissue across everybody, and I'm like, we got to find a way to make SaaS a little fun. So I actually bought the URL and the Twitter. If you go to twitter.com/SaaStr, you actually see that even though the first blog post was in 2012, I reserved the Twitter handle and I think the URL back in 2010 when I was still there. But I didn't have time to do it.
It says joined July 2010.
Okay, that was my insight. In July 2010, I'm like, we got to make SaaS more
Makes sense,
fun.
because like Friendster had just come out, so you were like, haha, we're gonna add ours to things, and then like, which one do I want?
Some of that isn't wrong. Some of that isn't wrong. It took a while, and then when I was a VP at Adobe after acquisition, I had a chance to reflect, and I wrote 100 blog posts about what I learned in SaaS, getting to $1 million a month in revenue. But I actually was not. No criticism of Adobe, but as an executive, not executive, but as a senior executive, I wasn't actually allowed to publish them unless they went through a very exhaustive review. So I said, heck it. And the first post then came out, I think, a week after I left Adobe, right? But I already had some of my never published 100 early looks at how you do CS, how you hire a VP of sales, all these iconic things I wrote there, right?
You had this like cache of like, dry powder, just like waiting to be like
of ideas. Yeah.
But also
I couldn't do anything with them and so then I just wanted to, I just wanted to share my learnings. I didn't know that anyone would ever read it, but I was, for folks that have been around for a while, I was very much inspired by Mark Suster's Both Sides of the Table. We worked together as SaaS founders in the early days, and I just wanted to emulate some of what he did with my own version of Just for SaaS. And but again, it definitely, there was so little content back then. I don't even think the SaaStr stuff was so great, but it really struck a chord because people had nothing, right? They had nothing to share no way to share their experiences.
I think there's like a key founder insight there, a key product insight, which is just like consistency, right? And like one of my favorite newsletters is by Lenny Rachitsky, right? One of the he's got a Substack on product management and what have you. And when he first started out, he was just consistent and as all get out, right? Just consistent. And it sounds like that's kind of something that you're describing a little bit, where I mean, you're being polite, but the SaaStr stuff is great, but it was voluminous and it was consistent because it was ready to go. And I think there's a good there's a good like founder lesson there, which is like consistency and execution oftentimes rules the day versus like the magical silver bullet or what have you, which we'd love to maybe tell ourselves that story, but the reality is like everything's just a grind.
It's true. Okay, back then we didn't really understand content marketing, but I had a rule that I would do one blog post and one Quora answer a day. And I did it every day since almost for 10 years. But certainly in the beginning, I didn't know cadence, but I just said, okay, every day I got to come up with something, some useful insight as a CEO and one Quora answer. But it's not the only way to do content marketing, but it might be the best way to do it, is to add consistent value, right? I think I haven't read too much of Lenny's stuff, but I think he's added consistent value, right? That's what folks learn, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect. And then when I compare on SaaS stuff, like I watch what David Sachs does. I mean, David Sachs does the All In podcast, but he's actually done a lot with SaaStr over the years, if you look. And he'll do something, and a lot of his content actually comes out of presentations he's given at SaaStr Annual. He'll get 50 times the engagement that I'll get on a good SaaStr post, but it might be once a quarter. Right. They both work, but not all of us can be David Sachs and have that hit rate. Right. You can do just as well, if maybe not better, but you can just do just as well if consistency is your strength. Right. But it has to at least be an A-.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And so, okay, but you're talking about blog posts, and SaaStr is not
or anything, any type of content, right? Any type of content marketing, right?
Oh, I get it, but kind of like you're talking about like early on, SaaStr was primarily blog posts, but now it's obviously like so much more. How did that go from being what essentially was Jason's blog?
Yeah,
right? Jason's very consistent aggregation of A- blog posts to a community. Like, was it the event that was first? Was it the social? Like, kind of what precipitated that?
Yeah, look, I didn't know about content marketing or events or community. I mean, community is a very powerful thing today, but 10 years ago, the idea that you could build a community in SaaS was insane, right? It was insane that this didn't even make sense. But I knew that people were reading this content all over the world, and I didn't understand why, because we didn't have a newsletter. I didn't even use Twitter or anything back then. I actually had no idea how people, for the most part, found this content. But I knew random people were grabbing me in the streets and telling me they'd read this content, which was crazy. So I decided, okay, I don't know. Let's do a meetup. Like, I'm not a meetup guy. I'm not even that social. I'm a bit of I get a little nervous at parties, but people do this. And we did one with no content, nothing, just a meetup, which people do today. And 600 people came.
Wow.
Yeah, including lots of great CEOs, right? Came. And, early days, I look at the pictures, Nick from Gainside and Makita from PandaDoc and so many other folks doing this stuff. They all came. And I'm like, okay, well, that 600 is a lot. So let's do a meetup. Then a couple months later with content.
Where was it?
These were just on the patio on Sandhill in Menlo Park. Most founders had never been to Menlo Park, but I used it for free.
So, so you had like the you had like August Capital's like summer party, and that was like where the beautiful people got to go, and then everyone got to go.
Same place, actually, the same Quadras complex. We did it. Yeah. Different patio, but same as August. And then we did another. Then I'm like, okay, well, I guess we should do it again. And we we had just 2 sessions, one with the co-founder of Marketo, which was a SaaS outlier at the time, and then me and my VP of sales and VP of demand gen marketing. But almost 1,000 people came, and it was totally booked out. And like, okay, people want content, I guess. Like, I don't know how to do this stuff. And then in February 2015, then toward the end of 2015, I'd actually reserved way back this URL SaaS Fest, thinking we got to make SaaS fun again, like SaaStr. Never used it, but I'm like, okay, we'll do a one-day event. I was inspired by what Max Altschuler had done back in Sales Hacker on the day, and he had hundreds of people come to a Sales Hacker event. I'm like, well, I can probably get a couple hundred people to come for a one-day event. Sure. And so I'm like, I asked my friends, I asked Aaron Levy if he would come and do the first session 1 week after Box IPO'd. I asked David Sachs when he was still just from Yammer. I asked a bunch of folks, and then I asked this founder that I didn't know, but had this hot app called Stuart Butterfield if he would be our last speaker in 2015. And he agreed to come, not knowing what SaaStr was.
Never heard of him.
But yeah, we had 1,500 people, which sold out in February 2015. And like, people's jaw just dropped because now there's so much content on the internet, so many podcasts and YouTubes. But in 2015, there was no one. You couldn't find. This was probably the first time Stuart Butterfield had spoken about Slack, right? And Aaron Levy speaking about Box's IPO and how hard SaaS was, and no one had. And people's jaws came out of the first set, and they were just so moved emotionally that it grew. And then we went from like 13 or 1,400 the first year to 2,800 the second year, and then 5,000 the third year, and then it all broke and shattered the third year. It all fell apart and broke. It all got wrecked and became incredibly complicated and difficult, but kept growing.
What drove that complexity? Because I think that's a really interesting thing. Like you might anticipate that these things would just scale linearly. It's just like, just add more space, just what have you. But it seems that you're indicating that that's not the case.
Two life learnings. The first was the first 2 years it was outsourced entirely. And as we know, building software, outsourcing actually can work just fine in the beginning days. And then it got too big and it just broke. A whole bunch of outsourced people working part-time on something with a multi-million-dollar budget just broke, right? So that's why it broke the second time, the first time. Then it kept breaking when I found I couldn't find a head of events that could produce a $3 and then $5 and then $10 million production. What happens is, this is super interesting. Usually in most businesses, as you get bigger and bigger, you can find folks that have done it before. Like for a while, Twilio hired all the Salesforce executives, right? They hired George Hu and Sarah Varney, and they hired a lot. They're like, oh, they've seen it before. And Salesforce hired all Oracle executives, right?
And that, exactly. Oh, you're like, these are the success factor people. And
but I turned out when you're producing events, there's, you know how many of them exist? None is the example.
There's no like diaspora of
there's
like people.
Nothing. And so I kept hiring folks that had done something smaller and less complicated, and they would not just fail, they would implode. They would implode. They would walk out the door and never come back. You could blame me as the leader, but what I've learned, oh my God, like what happens when you just outstrip the talent in a vertical, in an industry. And it was a brutally painful lesson. But it was an interesting one to learn. And we didn't really figure it out until really 2021, how to have a very stable team that could do something where only a handful of people can do it. And then it's not to get into niches. What's really interesting when you look at things that are really big, when you look at South by Southwest or Coachella or Art Basel or Dreamforce or things, there's no one. Actually, the ownership is broken up into so many people is the way they do it, that there actually isn't anybody that knows how to do all of these things. Like Web Summit has Stage Manager 1, Stage Manager 2, Stage Manager 3, Stage Manager 4, and has all these different people. And that's how
probably
they
a good
solve
lesson,
this problem.
right? Like what you want is like the appropriate level of like abstraction, right, in the architecture. I mean, like sales organizations, right? Like
that's how they did it.
Why, like, there's a reason why you have RVPs. You know,
but you need a
RSMs.
CRO.
RSMs that go into RVPs, that go into theater heads, that go into a CRO and what have you. And like, these things change over time. And like, if you I was talking with one of my AEs today about, one of our customers and their head of SDR, one of their SDR leaders is like managing 15 SDRs right now, which is like pretty bananas if you think about it.
Yep.
Now they're extremely data driven. Unsurprisingly, they've been like a 3-year Atrium customer, but it's still pretty nuts, right? Like there's a reason why you have these like layers of abstraction. Got it. So it's like at this point, it seems like you guys have really solved that. And I think at this point, you guys have like SaaStr Annual happening annually. You've got
Yep.
SaaStr Europa happening
Yeah, we should have like
annually as
5,000 people
well.
in London in June. Yeah, we should have like
Yeah.
5,000.
And then you guys are doing an experiment with SaaStr APAC as well in February in Singapore, yeah?
In Singapore. Yeah. Well, hopefully it'll be smaller, but we should have about 1,000. We'll have all the best VCs there and a pretty good group of founders and VPs and CEOs. So it should be good. Although we'll learn a lot, right? It will learn a lot. We thought that APAC, we've been doing Europa since 2018 and twice in Paris, once in Barcelona, now London. And I sort of assumed it would go on the same trajectory. But as huge as global as SaaS is and as huge as it is in India, I think my short-term learning is it will be great, but overall things may be a little less mature in SaaS and cloud in APAC than I had assumed. But that's okay. It'll still be, it's a multi-year journey, but it'll be good.
Well, there's also like a circularity to that as well. Like in order to engender the market, there needs to be community for like mentorship and information sharing and what have you. So, the kind of the acceleration of the seed crystal, if you will, like you guys are going to, bring some catalyst over there. Well, so I think one of the other things that you spend a lot of time doing, because like everyone's familiar with SaaStr, but they might be maybe less familiar with SaaStr Fund.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you're a full-time investor, even though like a full-time investor plus a full-time media company impresario here. So I guess that's like maybe 2 full-times, which is probably not surprising. But maybe what you can do is kind of like, share a little bit about how you started kind of like doing investing and like maybe what inspired the SaaStr Fund and kind of how it's differentiated from kind of other folks out there.
Sure. I find a lot of this stuff boring, but I know people find it interesting. So I'll answer your question, right? So,
Gee, thanks.
yeah. Well, I think founders should and executives should learn a lot about how investing works, right? There is, it's just, but my story. So after I left Adobe, one of my investors, a fund called Storm Ventures, asked me to join. I went there. I worked there for 2 years, and it was a great opportunity to really learn to invest. And it went pretty well. So my first investment was Pipedrive, that ended up selling for 1.5 billion. Yeah. My second one was
that a Vista pickup?
Yeah, they bought it for cash. That was the first one. So I learned a lot from that. The second one was Algolia, which is doing hundreds of millions and is worth 3 billion today, which will go IPO when we come out of this. Search as a service API. The third one was TalkDesk, which is worth 10 billion today. The fourth one is what became Greenhouse, which is worth about over $1 billion today. The fifth one was SalesLoft, which, as you know, sold for well over $2 billion last year, right? So I was kind of 5 for 5 in the beginning, and had a few other pretty good ones too. I actually you didn't know back then that they would be so good, but those ended up on the aggregate being fairly insane outcomes. Yeah. And then in 2016, I kind of struck out on my own for a variety of reasons. Got harder, but still done pretty darn well. And I try to do 3 or 4 investments a year of like 1 to 4 million. The world's changed. It got harder during the boom, right? From late 2020 to early 2022 when everything got insane. So I kind of slowed down a bit. And now I'm behind. I actually have too much money. As do some. I actually have, it's interesting for founders to be, I actually probably have too much money to invest now, and would love to do, 4 great investments in the first half of next year if I can find them. It's a really interesting topic. It may not be what you want to chat about of dry powder. There was a lot of talk about too much dry powder. Now people aren't talking about it anymore because VCs that do later stage stuff are just terrified. They're terrified. But there's a lot for folks that have been around for a while, like me. Here's something for founders to know. For folks that do seed, up to late seed, up to early A, folks that have been doing this I started investing in 2013. So anyone that's been doing it since 2015 or so, they're excited to invest now. Folks that started more recently
are declined and so on.
Not even just that. It's just like, it's still pretty good. Like good companies today are still worth $5 billion. Like if you invest at 10 million valuation and GitLab's worth $5 billion and HashiCorp's worth $6 and Mongo's worth $8, you could still make money. So maybe not as much as last year, but so folks that have been doing seed for a while that have had some returns, some hits, right? Yeah, maybe they're worth half of what they were last year, but we know how to do it. But folks that started investing more recently, actually, no matter what they claim to their LPs, their portfolios may have like nosedived, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, even with market adjustments, my current batch of companies is at 4.4x. So like that's still good. Like you can still make money if you quintuple your investors' money, right? So that's why hunt out investors now that have been around for a while. Hunt out investors that aren't scared. If you're early stage, they'll invest, but late stage, oh my God, I've been stunned the last 30 days how much worse. And I just wrote about it on SaaStr today, how much worse late stage investing is. And this is why there's so many layoffs in the industry. It's not, sometimes these companies are struggling, but for the most part, CEOs are waking up to the fact that there's just no more money coming. That's
Right.
the issue.
Like
That's what's
yeah,
fueling layoffs. There's
that
no
was
more
like
money coming.
yeah, like what used to be like, okay, this is good for 24 months.
Yeah.
Now it's like, nah, that actually might be enough for 36 months. It might be enough
No,
for 48 months. Yeah, it might be
it.
it. Right. So exactly. So like just, rejigger, tune your spreadsheet a little bit there and say like, oh, okay, gosh, like I guess we can't be that upside down right
We can't be
now.
that upside.
And
And then like
yeah,
and what if and then I can go back to the point. But basically, if you're wondering what happened in layoffs, like what Stripe said is like was transparent and true. Basically, everyone doubled their hiring last year. Everyone doubled their hiring. And so best case, they're freezing hiring now because they don't need twice as many people today. And capital was so cheap and there was just so much capital that every VP was like, well, they hit this crazy plan. I need 100 more reps. I need $100 million marketing budget. I need 1,000 CSMs. And yeah, when capital seemed to be infinite, you just gave it to them. Right, you just gave it to them. But the thing is, people hired 50% more people than they needed last year. When I look at go back at the headcounts of the later stage companies I've invested in, all of them doubled their headcount. Even some of the most conservative and lowest burn ones doubled their headcount last year, and no one needed to. Like, let's be honest, no one really needed to double. You do need to grow your sales team to meet your plan, but we didn't really need to double our headcount. It was too fast. It wasn't just the money. It would have been fine if we raised all the money and left it in the bank, right? But we didn't, right? We just doubled. We doubled the headcount,
I think the
and we
problem is
paid people a lot more. And we paid people
yeah,
a lot more. There's a lot of inflation, especially in sales.
yeah, I think that like here's the thing. I think one of the things I've come to realize is like it's funny, like there's like microeconomic actors, like people walking down the street making a decision as to whether or not they're like going to buy a hot dog or not, and then there's like macroeconomic actors, which is like Jerome Powell or whatever, and then there's kind of like medium economic actors, which is like startup founders and what have you. And I think the thing there is like everyone's got a boss, right? And I talk with my investors about this a lot, where like you raise this money not to just like have it sit in the bank, because your investors, like the deal there was to deploy that to then turn it into ARR growth such that it could go to the next markup, such that it could impact their IRR, which is exactly what the LPs want, and so on and so forth. So I think you'd have to have had pretty strong intestinal fortitude to essentially make a trade like that and say, hey, I'm going to raise a bunch of money in these frothy times, and I'm literally going to sit on it Warren Buffett style and then wait to deploy it later on.
Well, you're right.
I think that was like pretty.
Some did.
If you did it,
some did.
I mean,
high
five to you, man. Like God bless. But like those were probably pretty spicy board meetings while you were sitting there, like sitting on your cash pile.
They weren't spicy. I mean, I've got one I know that's actually really accelerated in the back half of this year that's sitting on 100 months of capital. When I just got the right there, they're still burning almost nothing. Some did. Awesome. And typically that happened when a company really didn't need a dollar and someone just offered to pay an insane price, and the culture didn't change. I think your point though is really important, which is part of the overhang is, you're right, is that at peak 2021, investors just told you to spend it all. Now, as founders, it's your job to do the right thing. Like but literally the messages you got, to say they're 180 degrees from today would be an understatement. Like, I don't know what's more than 180 from like it's like in the
upside
metaverse
down, inside out.
and you go to
Yeah.
a board meeting now, and like no one really cares if you grow, if as long as you don't need any more money. But the advice was horrific at the time that folks got last year. Like, horrific advice was, no matter how fast you were growing, it wasn't fast enough. Spend more. And in all fairness, the public markets were reflective of that, right? The public markets only cared about growth, so VCs only did. But really, many of the best VCs did not give that advice. I did not give that advice. I didn't tell anyone to spend any more money. I told people the opposite last year. I'm like, this is as good as it will ever be in your lifetime. But yes, VCs are to blame for things today, but maybe not always for the knee-jerk versions you hear on Twitter. It's that toxic advice. They have to be held responsible for that. Toxic advice to spend it all.
Yeah, but I mean, like I'm not here to like, be an apologist for venture investors, because like, Lord knows they don't need it. But their LPs were expecting the same sort of thing, right? And the same.
No. If you really want to get into the atomic piece, yes, LPs did fuel it, but LPs don't care whether you deploy how much the company burns or anything, right? They just want strong, reliable returns. LPs are not really to blame for anything. And the markup activity you described is the one thing where LPs were to blame. Historically, in my investing career, LPs were always skeptical of markups. They always looked, and many funds historically in the old days didn't even do markups, right? Mm-hmm. And then markups became institutionalized. And what happened? But LPs will always be like, whatever. I remember when I raised my first own fund back in 2016, the LPs literally didn't care about anything. It doesn't matter. I'm betting on the future, right? Markups don't matter. Companies go up and down. Companies raise at 100 or 200 and then fail. But then LPs last year all started to report it as is. Top LPs last year had 90% average IRR. So they got drunk on this too, and they fueled it, and they took this stuff seriously. But no, VCs do play to their own investors, but their own investors are one layer less in the weeds, right? They're less in the weeds.
Yeah. And so just kind of as we're kind of wrapping up on time here, Jason, when you say, so it sounds like you're saying that you have a bunch of, dry powder that you're sitting on, and you're looking for to make, generally you do 3 to 4 investments a year. What was 3 to 4 investments a year, 1 to 4 million, $1 to $4 million. Maybe you can kind of share a little bit about like, how SaaStr Fund is like differentiated from other kind of early stage kind of C stage.
I don't think I'm differentiated
providers.
in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that's differentiated is,
tell me what you really think.
Is that you get me for better or worse, right? That's the only thing that's differentiated is me. I don't think that firms are differentiated that much. A little bit. Look, I mean, SaaStr is a decent brand even today, right? And that can help with recruiting, like people do like SaaStr, right? So it certainly does help to be, look, having Sequoia or Excel on your cap table helps, and whether it should or shouldn't, having SaaStr certainly helps with recruiting executives. It is a good indicator, and founders should seek that out. Like, at the margin, pick a brand, because each time you raise capital, you only get so much for that, but do the best you can with that slice. But the honest answer is, beyond a brand, you get me, and that's about it, right? And I have pros and cons, so you should. I only invest in founders that really, really want me. This is what I've learned over the years. And every month, I'll do a favor meeting. I'll get an email from another VC, be like, "Can you meet with this startup?" And I'll be like, "Do they know SaaStr?" And they'll be like, "Not really." And I'll be like, I really, and I'll do the meeting, and it just never works out, right? It never works out. All the ones I've done, have been from SaaStr super fans. And if you are a SaaStr super fan and you've read SaaStr, and you think my honesty and direct approach and the ability to help you recruit is what you want, then email me, like, seek me out. If you don't think that I could add any value, or maybe I add negative value, then do not seek me out. And that's cool. Venture is only so lucrative, and it's only so interesting. And I would rather do fewer investments with founders that want me than be out there. And like, maybe to tie it together, venture is sales, right? And there's different sales strategies, right? And mine is 100% inbound. I failed at outbound as a CEO, And I
Got the
failed. It
content
is.
engine.
And I failed at outbound as an investor. Every outbound deal I've done, either one failed and I gave up. And so I just wait, and hopefully each year, 3 or 4, a couple good founders, great founders pick me. And if that's all you really have to do in investing, is like all the meetings don't matter. Nothing matters other than that a couple great people pick you. And I will tell you, I'll that's where I'm different. And, to finish the thread, if you're curious, like, you can meet 1,000 founders a year. You can meet one. Like the other ones don't matter. It's not a volume game. It's not. Tiger Global made it look like it. They had a good play, but really the great ones, in 20 minutes. In fact, you often know before you meet them. Not always, but often, right? The way they communicate, the way they share data, the way they share metrics, the way they share their vision. Not all of them, but so many of the best ones are so crystal clear on how they're going to get there, why they're going to get there. Those are the ones that you want to invest in, and those are the ones you want to work for as a VP or a leader. You want to work for the ones with that vision and the ability to express where they're going in a way that makes your jaw drop. And if you're not seeing that from your boss, find another boss, find another CEO to go work for, right?
I get that. We've had the benefit of having like Nick Mehta from Gainsight, Kyle Porter from SalesLoft, Manny Medina from Outreach come do Fireside chats, and the clarity of thinking and communication and kind of leadership is next level. Eduardo, are you here to take us out?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt this amazing conversation, but we need to wrap things up.
Very good.
But first, we close things here. I want to say thank you to our audience for attending this event. We love having you here. You're the best part of MSP. I also want to say thank you to our amazing Atrium for sponsoring this event. I just put the link for the offer offered at the beginning of this event in the chat again, audience. So check it out. Also, finally, thank you, Pete and Jason, for providing this great content. The recordings and key takeaways will be available on our website shortly, and I will send a follow-up email with the link. And don't forget to check out our upcoming events. I will see you next time. Pete and Jason, we can hang out backstage now. Bye, audience.
Cool.
It was good to have you.
Thanks, everybody who will watch and listen.
Thank you.